What if some of the Bible's strangest food rules were actually early food safety warnings, written thousands of years before anyone understood germs, toxins, or bacteria? And what if a few foods that were once served without a second thought, even by figures we consider heroes of the faith, our food's modern science now says to leave alone entirely? Picture Abraham, one of the most revered figures in the entire Bible, pouring a guest a cup of milk straight from the animal. No pasteurization, no testing, nothing but genuine hospitality and good intentions. Completely normal for the time. Genuinely risky by today's standards, and he would have had no way of knowing that. Quick note before we start. This isn't about religious dietary law for its own sake, and it isn't a suggestion that any of this reflects on how safe, modern, regulated versions of these foods actually are today. Every entry on this list has a real, modern, science-backed reason attached to it, explained as we go. Let's count down 13 biblical foods to avoid, starting with 3 that were once perfectly normal, and ending with the single rule repeated more times across the entire Bible than any other food instruction that exists. Stay with me for number 13, a food eaten straight from the wild with a genuinely bizarre way of making people sick. And number 1, the food this entire list has been building toward the whole time. Let's start at number 13. Number 13. Wild honey. Here's the food we promised you at the very start. Have you ever heard of a honey that can genuinely drop your blood pressure and slow your heart rate down to a dangerous level, not from anything added to it, but from what the bees themselves happen to feed on? It's called mad honey, and it's a real, documented phenomenon, not internet folklore. When bees collect nectar specifically from certain rhododendron species, common across parts of the Mediterranean, the Black Sea region, and the Himalayas, the resulting honey contains a compound called granotoxin, which can cause dizziness, nausea, and, in more serious cases, dangerously low blood pressure and irregular heart rhythms in anyone who eats enough of it. Emergency rooms in parts of Turkey and Nepal, regions where this type of honey is still harvested and sold, see cases of mad honey poisoning regularly enough that local doctors are specifically trained to recognize the symptoms. John the Baptist's diet is described in Matthew chapter 3 as locusts and wild honey, eaten while living out in the wilderness rather than in any town or settled community. Nobody in that account is suggesting his honey was contaminated, but the passage is a useful reminder of just how normal foraging for wild honey was at the time, with no way to know which flowers a given hive had actually been feeding on before finding it. Modern, commercially produced honey comes from managed hives, where beekeepers have a reasonable idea of what's blooming nearby, which is part of why cases of mad honey poisoning today are rare and tend to cluster specifically around unregulated, wild harvested honey from regions where those particular rhododendron species grow densely. If you've ever bought honey directly from a roadside stand in an unfamiliar country with no label at all, this is exactly the kind of product worth being a little more cautious about. From a wild food with an unpredictable source, let's move to one gathered just as freely and just as blindly. Number 12. Foraged wild greens. Have you ever eaten something and immediately regretted not checking what it actually was first? A whole group of people in the Bible had that exact moment, mid-meal, and it's recorded in enough detail that we know exactly how it played out, almost like a scene from a modern documentary. In 2 Kings, chapter 4, during a famine, a group of prophets ask Elisha's servant to prepare a large pot of stew. He goes out into a field and gathers wild herbs and gourds he doesn't fully recognize. shredding them straight into the pot without pausing to consider whether he actually knew what he was holding. The moment everyone starts eating, they cry out in alarm, convinced there's death in the pot, certain something poisonous has made it into the food. Elisha has flour thrown in, and the stew becomes safe to eat. But the panic in that moment is the whole point of the story. A room full of grown men, suddenly unsure whether their next bite could kill them. That fear was completely reasonable. Many mildly toxic or seriously poisonous plants look almost identical to safe, edible ones. And this remains true today. Water hemlock, one of the most toxic plants in North America, closely resembles wild carrot and parsnip, closely enough that experienced foragers have still been fatally poisoned by mistaking one for the other. Certain wild mushrooms look nearly identical to edible varieties, right up until they cause liver failure. Days later, often after the person feels fine for the first 24 hours, modern plant identification apps and field guides with photographs have made foraging dramatically safer than it was for that servant working from memory and guesswork alone in an unfamiliar field. If foraging interests you today, cross-referencing multiple identification sources and ideally learning directly from someone experienced is the difference between Elisha's story and a genuinely serious outcome. From a pot of soup that nearly went badly wrong, let's move to a drink that would have seemed like nothing more than simple hospitality. Number 11. Raw, unpasteurized milk. Would it surprise you that one of the most respected acts of hospitality in the entire Bible is something health officials today specifically warn people against, repeatedly and publicly? In Genesis chapter 18, Abraham rushes to prepare a meal of curds, milk, and freshly cooked meat for 3 unexpected visitors, offering it as an act of generous, immediate hospitality to strangers passing through his camp in the middle of the day. The milk in that story would have been raw, straight from the animal, since pasteurization wouldn't exist for another several thousand years, and nobody at that table would have thought twice about drinking it that way. Unpasteurized milk today carries a real, well-documented risk of E. coli, salmonella, and listeria contamination. And health agencies, including the CDC, specifically flag raw milk as one of the higher risk food categories relative to how many people actually consume it, with outbreaks reported regularly enough that this isn't a theoretical concern confined to old textbooks. Listeria, in particular, is a serious risk for pregnant women, specifically capable of crossing the placenta in ways that plain pasteurized milk simply doesn't carry the same risk of, which is why obstetricians specifically flag it as a food to avoid during pregnancy, even when everything else on a person's plate is considered perfectly safe. Pasteurization, developed in the 1860s and widely adopted across the following decades, works by heating milk just enough to kill harmful bacteria without significantly changing its nutritional value, which is why virtually all milk sold in stores today has gone through this exact process. Abraham had no version of this available to him, no way to know which animals might be carrying something dangerous, which makes his hospitality genuinely generous, but by modern standards, genuinely riskier than he could have known. That completes the 3 foods that were once perfectly ordinary and are now worth a second thought. From here forward, we're moving into the foods the Bible flagged as problems from the very beginning. Number 10. Overeaten quail. Have you ever eaten so much of one thing that you actually made yourself sick afterward? The kind of sick where you swear off that food for months. An entire nation did exactly that in the book of Numbers, and the consequences described are dramatic enough that the location itself got renamed because of it, permanently as a warning to everyone who passed through afterward. In Numbers chapter 11, after months of eating nothing but manna, the Israelites demand meat, and God sends an enormous flock of quail, so many that people are described gathering them for 2 full days straight, piling up more than they could possibly eat in a reasonable amount of time, driven by a craving that had clearly built up over months of the same repetitive food. While the meat was still between their teeth, according to the text, a plague breaks out among the people, and many die. The place is renamed Kibroth Hattava, meaning graves of craving, a name meant to be remembered by everyone who ever heard the story afterward. Quail itself isn't toxic. This entry isn't about the food. It's about what happens to a body pushed into extreme, rapid overconsumption after a long period of restriction. A pattern modern medicine recognizes in refeeding syndrome, where reintroducing large amounts of food too quickly after prolonged deprivation can cause dangerous shifts in the body's electrolytes and metabolism, sometimes serious enough to require hospital monitoring in extreme clinical cases. The lesson translates directly to today. Even a genuinely good, nutritious food, taken in extreme excess, especially after a period of restriction, can cause real physical harm that has nothing to do with the food being dangerous on its own. Let's move from eating too much to eating something that had already gone bad before anyone took a bite. Number 9. Spoiled manna. Have you ever left leftovers out a little too long and regretted it the next morning, opening the container to a smell you immediately knew meant trouble? The Israelites learned that exact lesson within days of receiving one of the most famous foods in the entire Bible. In Exodus chapter 16, God provides manna fresh every single morning, with explicit instructions not to keep any of it overnight, a rule that must have seemed strange to a people used to storing whatever food they could get their hands on. Some people try anyway, unable to resist the instinct to hoard just a little extra. And by the next morning, the text says plainly that it bred worms and began to stink. It's one of the most direct, almost bluntly descriptive accounts of food spoilage anywhere in Scripture. No ambiguity about what happened or why, and no attempt to soften the description for a squeamish reader. The underlying principle hasn't changed even slightly in thousands of years. Food left at room temperature, especially anything moist or protein-rich, becomes a genuine breeding ground for bacteria and, eventually, insects and their larvae within a matter of hours in many climates, not days. What's changed is our ability to slow that process down. Refrigeration, proper sealed storage, and a basic understanding of food safety timelines that the wilderness generation simply didn't have access to, no matter how badly they wanted to hold on to a little extra for later. It's a useful reminder that it looked fine yesterday has never actually been a reliable food safety test, then or now. From food that's spoiled by accident, let's move to a food eaten out of complete and total desperation. Number 8. Dove's dung during the siege. How far do you think you'd actually go if you were truly, genuinely starving, with no food left anywhere in your city and no way out for yourself or your family? In 2 Kings chapter 6, the city of Samaria is under such a severe siege that the text records people paying enormous sums for what's described as dove's dung, sold as food at a price roughly equivalent to what a skilled laborer might earn over several days of ordinary work, an amount that would have been unthinkable to spend on food under any normal circumstance. Scholars have genuinely debated this passage for a long time. Some argue it's meant literally, a sign of just how catastrophic the famine had become. Others argue it's more likely a colloquial name for a type of wild bulb, seed, or plant, similar to how some plants today carry blunt, unflattering common names. that have nothing to do with their actual composition or nutritional value. Either reading leads to the same conclusion. People were paying an extraordinary price for something that, in any normal circumstance, nobody would consider food at all, let alone something worth an entire family's savings. This entry isn't really about a specific food, to avoid the way most of the others on this list are. It's a reminder of just how far genuine famine can push human behavior, and it stands in the Bible as one of the starkest illustrations of desperation recorded anywhere in the text. From a famine so severe, it changed what counted as food. Let's move to a meal sourced from somewhere. Food safety guidelines would tell you never to look. Number 7. SAMSON'S lion honey. Would you eat something you found inside a dead animal's body without stopping to think twice about it first? Samson did exactly that, without a second thought, in one of the odder food moments in the entire Bible, a detail easy to miss if you're only remembering him for his strength. In Judges chapter 14, Samson kills a lion with his bare hands, and sometime later, passing by the carcass again on his way back, finds that a swarm of bees has taken up residence inside it and produced honey. He scoops some out with his hands, eats it as he walks, and later shares it with his parents without ever telling them where it came from, letting them enjoy it without the context that might have made them hesitate. Setting aside the honey itself, which the bees would have produced the same way regardless of location, the real issue here is the carcass itself as a food source. Decomposing animal remains harbor a range of dangerous bacteria, including several species capable of causing serious illness, and carry genuine risk of exposure to pathogens through direct contact, something modern food safety guidelines treat as an absolute line rather than a gray area worth debating case by case. Samson's story reads as a strange but harmless curiosity, precisely because nothing goes wrong for him in the text, but that outcome owes more to narrative convenience than to any actual food safety principle holding up in his favor. From honey sourced from a place no modern food inspector would ever approve, let's move to an entire category of seafood built around a real, ongoing environmental concern. Number 6. Bottom-feeding seafood. Do you ever wonder why some seafood comes with specific health warnings while other kinds never do, even when they're sitting right next to each other at the same fish counter? There's a real environmental science reason behind that difference, and it lines up surprisingly well with an ancient dietary rule. Leviticus chapter 11 restricts water creatures without fins and scales, which in practice covers most shellfish and a range of bottom-dwelling species, animals that spend their lives at or near the sediment on the ocean or riverbed, rather than swimming freely through open water, where far less tends to settle and accumulate over time. Modern environmental science has documented a genuine pattern here. Bottom-feeding and filter-feeding species tend to accumulate higher concentrations of heavy metals, industrial pollutants, and other environmental toxins in their tissue than free-swimming fish, simply because sediment is where pollutants that sink out of the water column tend to settle and concentrate over time, sometimes for decades. This is exactly why health agencies today issue specific consumption advisories for certain bottom-dwelling species, particularly in waters near industrial areas, while placing far fewer restrictions on fish that spend their lives higher in the water column, feeding on things that never sank to the bottom in the first place. This isn't a case of the ancient world understanding industrial pollution, since none of that existed yet, but the modern environmental overlap is real and worth knowing regardless of the original intent behind the rule. From a category of seafood tied to environmental contamination, let's move to birds with a very direct, very literal reason to avoid them. Number 5. Scavenger birds. You've probably heard the phrase, "You are what you eat." For this next category, that's closer to literal biology than a metaphor, playing out exactly the way it sounds. Leviticus chapter 11 specifically lists birds of prey and scavengers as animals to avoid: eagles, vultures, kites, and several others named individually, animals that either hunt other creatures or feed on carcasses that are already dead and decaying, rather than catching anything fresh themselves. This lines up with a real principle in modern toxicology and ecology called biomagnification, where toxins and heavy metals become more concentrated the higher up the food chain you go, since a predator or scavenger, eating many contaminated animals over its lifetime, accumulates and concentrates whatever those animals were carrying in their own tissue. It's the same basic principle behind modern advice to limit large predatory fish like certain tuna and swordfish, specifically because of mercury accumulation, a food chain concern rather than a concern about the fish itself, in isolation from everything it's eaten over the years. Scavenger birds in particular carry an added risk beyond ordinary predators. Since carrion can harbor bacteria and toxins, the scavenger's own body has adapted to tolerate. But a human digestive system has no such adaptation from birds that concentrate whatever they've eaten. Let's move to the single most well-known meat restriction in the entire Bible. Number 4. Undercooked pork. Have you ever wondered why pork specifically tends to get cooked more thoroughly than a steak or a piece of chicken breast, even by people who've never heard the reason why? There's a real, specific parasite behind that habit, one that's still infecting people today, decades after it became widely understood. Leviticus chapter 11 names the pig specifically among the animals not to eat, part of a broader list of dietary restrictions given to the Israelites. Unlike some other entries on this list, modern science does point to a specific, concrete health reason connected to pork, in particular, trichinosis, an infection caused by a parasitic roundworm, historically common in undercooked or raw pork, capable of causing muscle pain, fever, and in severe cases, serious complications affecting the heart and nervous system that can persist long after the initial infection clears. Here's the important distinction worth making clearly. This isn't a reason to avoid pork entirely today. Modern commercial pork farming, combined with proper cooking to a safe internal temperature, has made trichinosis genuinely rare in developed countries with regulated food systems, dropping dramatically over the past several decades. The actual risk today comes specifically from undercooked pork, wild-caught game meat, or pork from unregulated, informal sources, not from a well-cooked chop picked up at an ordinary grocery store and prepared the way most people already cook it. Whatever the original reasoning behind the biblical restriction, modern food science has at least identified one very real, specific hazard that undercooked pork genuinely carries. From a specific parasite risk, let's move to a fat with real cardiovascular reasoning behind it. Number 3. Sacrificial animal fat. Here's a fat. This list has strong, specific scientific reasoning to back up, reasoning that happens to align closely with what cardiologists still say today. In an ordinary checkup, Leviticus chapter 3, and again in chapter 7, explicitly forbid eating the internal fat, called chelev in Hebrew, surrounding the organs of cattle, sheep, and goats, reserved instead to be burned as an offering rather than consumed by the people themselves, under penalty of being cut off from the community entirely. a warning severe enough to make clear this wasn't treated as optional. This particular fat is almost entirely saturated fat, the exact type modern cardiology specifically targets for its role in raising LDL cholesterol and increasing cardiovascular risk over time, the same basic mechanism doctors explain to patients managing high cholesterol today. It's a striking overlap. A law written more than 3,000 years before anyone understood cholesterol or arterial plaque lines up almost precisely with current dietary guidance on saturated fat intake, arrived at through completely different reasoning thousands of years apart. Trimming visible fat from red meat before cooking, and specifically avoiding the organ surrounding fat this law describes, remains genuinely sound advice today, not for ceremonial reasons, but for the same cardiovascular reasoning a doctor would give you in an ordinary office visit. From a fat with real cardiovascular backing, let's move to a food connected less to any single nutrient and more to what happens after an animal has already died. Number 2. Meat from animals that died naturally. Have you ever wondered what a food safety inspector is actually checking for when they sign off on meat at a processing facility, stamping it as approved before it ever reaches a store? This next rule reads almost exactly like their job description, written thousands of years earlier by people who had no formal name for what they were describing. Deuteronomy chapter 14 instructs the Israelites not to eat any animal that has died on its own, specifically distinguishing this from meat properly slaughtered, though it does note the meat could be given to a foreigner or sold to someone outside the community rather than simply discarded. Leviticus adds a similar instruction elsewhere regarding animals that died naturally or were killed by other animals in the field. The reasoning lines up almost exactly with modern food safety principles. An animal that dies of unknown causes could have died from disease, infection, or toxin exposure, none of which are visible or detectable without proper examination, and none of which go away simply because the animal is now being eaten rather than left alone to decompose. This is precisely why modern meat inspection exists at all, checking specifically for signs of illness, infection, or contamination before any animal enters the food supply, a formal process that didn't really exist as an organized system until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, following several well-documented public health scandals that made the need obvious. Whatever category of meat you're eating today, purchasing from a source that's actually been inspected accomplishes exactly what this ancient instruction was already gesturing toward. Which brings us to number 1, and the single rule that shows up more consistently across the entire Bible than anything else on this list. Number 1. Blood. Here's the food this entire list has been building toward. Of everything covered in this video, a genuinely remarkable level of consistency across a text written by dozens of different authors across different centuries, different languages, and vastly different circumstances. It starts right after the flood, in Genesis chapter 9, where God tells Noah not to eat meat with its blood still in it, one of the very first instructions given to humanity in the aftermath of that catastrophic event. Leviticus chapter 17 repeats and expands the instruction at length, tying it to something deeper about the significance of blood itself, rather than treating it as an incidental cooking preference. And centuries later, in Acts chapter 15, when the early church leaders meet to decide which Jewish dietary laws should still apply to non-Jewish believers, abstaining from blood is one of the small handful of rules they specifically choose to keep, long after most other ceremonial food laws had been set aside entirely as no longer binding. Modern food safety gives this one real, practical backing as well. Raw or undercooked blood can carry a range of pathogens depending on the animal, and how it was handled during slaughter. And proper cooking is precisely what neutralizes that risk, which is exactly why virtually every food safety guideline today calls for meat to be cooked to a safe internal temperature rather than served raw or rare, blood included, regardless of any religious or cultural tradition involved. Whatever you make of the ceremonial reasoning behind this particular law, the sheer consistency of it, appearing at the very beginning of the biblical story and getting explicitly reaffirmed at one of its most pivotal, defining moments centuries later, makes this the one entry on this entire list that's genuinely impossible to overlook. 13 foods. And the real thread running through all of them isn't really about ancient religious law at all. It's spoilage, contamination, toxin accumulation, and plain overindulgence. The same handful of reasons food safety experts give today, just described in language written long before anyone had the microscope or the science to explain exactly why any of it mattered. Which of these 13 surprised you the most? I genuinely guess it's either the mad honey or the blood rule showing up all the way through Acts, since both tend to catch people off guard the first time they hear the details. Let me know in the comments which one got you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.